So today we're going to be making some vegan lasagna. Now everybody likes lasagna, but a lot of people don't know how to make it vegan and how can you make it taste good as a vegetarian. So that's why we got Qristara on the scene, because she actually makes our family lasagna. So she's going to show us how she puts together the lasagna. Now, it is vegetarian, it's vegan, it's not gluten-free. I'm only saying that because in another episode we'll actually show how to do a gluten-free vegan lasagna. So today, Qristara is going to take the wheel and show us again, how do we make a vegan vegetarian lasagna?
Well, hello and happy Sabbath. As you've heard, today we're going to be making lasagna, and I'm just going to introduce the ingredients before we start assembling the lasagna. Mostly when it comes to making lasagna, most of the things you don't have to cook. A lot of things you can just take and they're already either raw or just taken from the package, and only a few things have to be cooked when it comes to making our lasagna. So we're going to start with our base, which is whole wheat lasagna, and this is just kind of halfway cooked. We don't want this to be completely noodle texture where it's really loose, because we're going to cook it again when we're making lasagna and it's stewing in the pot itself.
So once you got it to boiling, you put it in. About how long did you let it cook?
I didn't time it necessarily. I only cooked it until it was movable. Once you can bend it in the water, then stop cooking it, because it's loose and it's kind of, have you ever heard of pre-cooked lasagna where it's already in the box where you can just put it in the pan itself? That's what we're making ourselves without having to pay that extra for pre-cooked lasagna.
Okay, cool.
So next we have our sauce. And this is my favorite brand of sauce. You can use any brand that you prefer, but this is Ragu Gardein combination. You have to watch out with Ragu, because not all of their sauces are vegan or vegetarian, because some of them have meat, like sardines or beef in them. So you'll have to either get Gardein combination or onion and garlic roasted. Those are the two that do not have any meat products in the sauce itself.
Another one too that we use, even though we're not using it for this dish, is that the Prego actually has a sugar-free marinara or spaghetti sauce. So it has all the same ingredients, all the exact vegetables, all of those mixed, but it doesn't have any added sugar. So that's another option too that you
or
can use.
Any of the substitutes of sugar. It's just no sugar at all. Not any other types of sugar that sugar-free labels have.
Okay.
Also, we're going to use for our meat substitute. If you watched our chili recipe, we are using the Beyond Meat ground beefless crumbles.
Also the Gardein crumbles as well.
Yes, and I use a bag for our lasagna, because we don't want our lasagna to just be chock full of meat, because we're going to be adding so many other different ingredients that you don't want to be too heavy. So a bag is enough for the amount of lasagna that we're going to be making today. And then for our feta
cottage cheese
substitute, we're going to be using tofu. Now, you might be thinking tofu doesn't taste like anything. Well, it's our job to flavor it. And what we do is we mash it and we get it to a feta cottage cheese texture. And we're going to add salt, garlic powder, and Italian seasonings. Now, you can substitute that out for basil or thyme or rosemary, oregano. But I use basil and oregano for mine. But if you just have Italian seasoning in your cabinet, you can just use Italian seasoning, garlic powder, and salt.
So that's really kind of a preference thing, because when you're actually making it with cottage cheese, the cottage cheese has no flavor. It just tastes like sour cream. So even if you just take the tofu and just crumble it up, and it doesn't really have that much of a flavor, you still should be okay.
Well, tofu, cottage cheese does have a taste, and even though it doesn't taste like anything, it still tastes like something. Tofu tastes like nothing, and it'll water down your lasagna taste, and it'll take down the flavor. So you want to add the flavors that you're adding to everything else, so that you still have the texture of the cottage cheese, but you also have the flavoring of everything else that you're putting in there.
Cool.
So for our last and our second to last, we have spinach. Now, I do not do anything. This is just whole big leaves of spinach. And this is going to be our green added to our lasagna to make it a little bit more healthy. And for added layer and depth, I have prepared cooked zucchini and squash. Now, this is just sauteed zucchini and squash with the same seasonings that I use for the tofu. And we just let this cook with onions and green pepper. And we cook the onions till they were brown and caramelized. And then we sweat the zucchini just till it's wilted, just because we don't want to put raw zucchini in there because it won't cook all the way down in the lasagna for the amount of time we put it in the oven. So
you didn't fry that?
No.
You just sauteed it
with a little bit of water just so it doesn't burn at the bottom.
A little olive oil. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is optional because you don't have to have it.
You don't have to put this in there,
but
it
gives you another layer.
It completely fills up the lasagna layers. So
you got all kinds of greens in this lasagna. The star is really not the meat, but the star is really all these vegetables you got going in there.
Yes.
Okay.
So now that we have listed everything that we're going to need, we're going to take our pan. This is the pan that I'm using, but I usually use a smaller spoon, but since we have more people eating, we're going to use bigger. It does not matter what type of pan you use as long as it's a deep dish, because we're layering and we don't want to have 2 layers of lasagna. We want to have a good 3 or 4 layers.
Okay.
So with this, we're going to have our pan. And when it comes to cooking your lasagna, I used to always make too much lasagna. And what I would do is beforehand.
But we never complain, right?
Well, lasagna pasta, and it wouldn't be enough for the amount of fillings that I would have.
So you mean you would not make too much total, but you just have so much pasta left over.
Pasta left over. Gotcha. So to prevent that, can you pass me that lasagna? What I do is beforehand, before I even cook it, I have 3 right here. And what I do is I take the raw and I go on ahead and layer it on the pan. And however many it takes to pretty much kind of fill the pan, that's how many layers across you want to use. And then you just stack them up to eyeball it and see, okay, I'm going to need 3 at the bottom and 3 layers. So 3 times 3, I'm going to need 9 pieces of pasta. And that's how you get the exact amount of pasta you need, and you don't use too much or trying to use the whole box and you don't have enough stuffing to go with it.
Wow, so you can make like 3 layers of lasagna. You don't even use the whole box.
You don't even use the whole box for the amount of.
So you practice it out before you go ahead and, okay, smart.
So putting that back in, for the layering process, you want to start with your sauce. The sauce is basically your liquid for your lasagna, so it doesn't stick to the pan or allow things to dry out in the process of cooking it. So we are going to add a spoonful of pasta sauce, and we're going to cover the bottom of the pan, just so that we get a lubricant layer, so that when we're cooking and when it finally comes out, it can easily scoop out without having to scrape the bottom of the pan.
So you're just adding some sauce to get you some covering there, so you don't have to use any
no oil,
no what do they call the spray? No cooking spray.
No, you don't need that because it's not necessary and it's not very, very healthy to add more oil than you need to your pan.
Okay.
So with that, you just have a little slight covering of sauce on your pan. And now we're going to start the layering process. So it's best to have your ingredients set out in front of you so you can just go bam, 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 one thing to the next. So we're going to add, I measured out, I need 3 pieces on the bottom. So we start with 3, and we're just going to take our pieces out, and we are going to 1, 2, and 3.
I noticed here when you're using the cooked pasta, it's gotten some of that moisture in there, so it's actually wider now. So even though you had the raw before,
even though it looked like it wasn't going to cover the whole pan, now that you cooked it, it's covered the whole bottom of the pan, and you only needed 3 pieces.
Wow!
So you don't have to worry about it if it's wrinkly. It's going to lay out properly once you start to cook it again. And you don't have to worry about it if you don't think it's cooked enough, because the amount of sauce we add to each layer that has liquid. And when we heat it up, it's going to soak up that liquid and actually be good for the pasta because it'll soak up the liquid but not be mushy. You do not want mushy lasagna.
Okay.
So we're going to add a good helping of sauce to each piece of lasagna.
So you're covering up each piece with your sauce there, and you're not worried about it going over on the side because, like you're saying, that moisture is actually going to help cook the layer that's above it and then the layer above it. Okay.
So we have our first layer. Okay. So we have our first layer, and that's your sauce. So now this is pretty much preference on which one you like to go first. I like to do the tofu first because it's the most thing that you want to spread out evenly, because if you put a whole bunch of things above it, you won't be able to spread it out properly because there's so many things on it and you'll be moving everything trying to spread it around.
Okay.
So
it doesn't matter what order you go in, but whatever you put on, you do want that to be even. Very
even, because every slice, you don't want it to be different, whereas one person gets all meat and one person gets all tofu and one person gets all spinach. You want it to be even slices all around. Now, you don't want too much because you're going to layer this 3 times. So
this is one layer right here.
This is one layer, and this is enough for one layer because the next layer is going to have another thing of tofu on it. So just enough to where you cover in it, and you don't have to not see the pasta, but just so you don't see a lot of pasta at the bottom. So now that we have done our tofu, now we're going to add our meat and just sprinkling that. This, I did not cook this at all. I just took it out of the bag and de-thawed it, so it's not clumps of meat. So we're just going to sprinkle this on.
So you don't have to cook the meat.
No.
And even if it's frozen, you just want to make sure it's crumbled up so that you can get your even layer again.
So here's our second even layer of meat.
Okay.
And that's our meat layer.
Okay.
And then before we add our spinach and cheese, we're going to add our sauteed vegetables and zucchini mixture.
So this is zucchini and squash. It looks like you thinly sliced it so you can get it all the way cooked through. And then you just sauteed that for what, like maybe 2 or 3 minutes?
No, this took a little while because it was a little bit more, but depending on how much, just till it's wilted.
Okay, so like your average, like one zucchini, like
that maybe 10
one
minutes.
Squash. Okay, all right. So you sweat that out. So that's nice and thin.
Just so that when it's cooking in the lasagna, it's already cooked and it won't be crunchy. Unless you like crunchy zucchini. I don't like crunchy zucchini. I like it to be a soft texture instead of crunchy like a cucumber or something. So just a nice little layer just so that you're getting it on every row of lasagna and just evenly. And you might think that's not enough, but we have more layers to it. So that's our first layer, and we're going to add our spinach. This is going to wilt. So you may be thinking, why is she putting all this spinach on the top layer? I mean, on this one layer. This is going to wilt, and spinach wilts so small that by the time this goes down, it'll be just sprinkles of spinach everywhere.
It'll almost be like it's not there because it takes up.
So now that we have our spinach layer, we're going to add our cheese.
This is a vegan cheddar cheese?
This is a vegan cheddar cheese.
Okay.
This is our Kroger Simple Truth cheese. And we used to use Daiya, but this one is budget friendly, and it is quite small that it spreads way better than Daiya cheese, which you have to use more if you want to get that same level of coverage.
So because this is shredded so thinly, you actually get better coverage when you're trying
with
to do
less cheese itself.
Okay, and I noticed that you're using the cheddar cheese. Most people will use mozzarella. Why is that?
Just a matter of taste. Vegan cheeses, when it comes to mozzarella, don't have that same level of taste that other real mozzarella's would. With cheddar cheese and vegan, it gives it a taste of a cheese taste. So we use cheddar cheese on the top just because it's more flavor. So now this is our first layer. So we're going to do that same process all over again on our second layer of pasta, of lasagna. So we just want to stick it down. Don't worry about if it's sticking up just a little because we're going to add things on top.
Okay.
So here is our second layer. We're gonna go in with our sauce. And I'm using a spoonful each. It's up to you on how much sauce you want.
And this is a big spoon. It's kind of like a serving spoon.
Yes.
So it's not like a little teaspoon.
And you just rub the sauce on the back of your spoon just to cover the entire piece of lasagna. Doesn't have to be pretty. You just want it to where it covers every piece. And if you need a little bit more, just sprinkle a little bit more in places. So now we add our tofu.
Now with this tofu, is this soft tofu, firm?
This is firm tofu. Soft tofu would be like slime in your lasagna. Soft tofu isn't the best texture. You want to use firm tofu because you still want it to have that same texture when it's heated up and all of the seasonings are soaking into it. You still want it to hold that texture of a feta.
So you took it right out of the container. You didn't have to dry it or press it or anything like that.
You just drain it of all the liquids that come in the package with it. And then I mashed it with my hands just because that gave me the even amount of smashed texture that I wanted. So then with our layer of tofu, we're going to add our meat again. So another thing of meat.
I notice this is the second layer. This thing is really
Yes.
lifting up. You might, whoa, it's going to go out of the pan, but I guess you say when it cooks down, everything just kind of settles.
The height is because of the spinach. And once the spinach cooks down, it's going to go down so much that it's not going to be flat, but it's going to go down in size, so you don't have to worry about it overflowing in your pan.
Okay, so by the time you get to that third layer, you probably do want to be a little bit out of your dish, I guess, huh?
Just a little.
Okay.
So now we're sprinkling.
It's so amazing how the veggies, it's like they're their own dish by themselves. It smells amazing because that saute with the onions and the green peppers are already working there. So you got that, the onion, green peppers in your saute working with what's in your sauce. I mean,
a lot of seasoning. You want to make sure everything is seasoned.
Yeah.
Some people say vegan food isn't seasoned, but it's our job to season it so that it has a flavor and a taste. So now our second layer, and we're going to add our spinach.
So you're using whole leaf, fresh spinach.
Whole leaf. You don't have to take off the stems. The stems will cook down as well, and you don't have to cut it because you don't need to do all that.
They're all going to cook down. So you don't want to mess around with something like a frozen spinach, or
you can use a frozen spinach if that's all you can use, but it's best to use that because that's added water.
More water.
Frozen spinach has water in it more than fresh spinach, so it will make your your lasagna extremely wet. So with our next layer of cheese on there, you don't have to be stingy when it comes to the cheese because you want every piece that everyone gets to have the same amount. So that's our second layer. And now we're going to add our top layer. The top layer is important because you want to seal everything that you just put in. You want to seal it with the top so that while it's cooking, it is kind of stewing but not drying out.
Oh, so if you're leaving cracks in between the lasagna, that's going to let moisture get out and it's going to dry it out.
So now with our this is our third layer and our last layer. We want to, this is where most of the sauce goes.
Oh, okay.
The sauce inside and at the bottom are for moisture purposes. This is also for moisture purposes, but because we cook our lasagna for a little while, we don't want the top to dry out and it gets hard.
Hard and crunchy. And some people like
some people like hard and crunchy. I personally do, but some people don't because the lasagna can get a little bit dangerous and too hard.
cracking the teeth for
Yes.
the love of lasagna. We don't want that.
So we put a good layer. You want to add a little in between the pieces because the pieces don't completely cover the pan itself.
So that sauce is going to seal it in. So if you got cracks, you're putting in sauce in there.
Yes.
It looks like.
So
Wow.
sauce in the crack and sauce. You don't want to be too messy on this when it comes to the sides of the pan because that'll burn and it'll have a burnt smell. But you just want it in the cracks.
So this is how it looks.
And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to add cheese.
Okay.
So now with our cheese, we're just going to sprinkle.
Final layer, putting some cheese on there. Great.
So that is our final layer, and this is going to go into a pan of oven 450. Depending on your size will determine how long you could put it in, but I'm going to put this in for probably 25 minutes.
So 25 minutes cooked down. Your concern is your meat done because it's vegan, so you're not worried about really cooking the meat. What are we trying to cook here?
You're just trying to get everything to melt together, the cheese, the spinach, the sauce to kind of, I don't know, stew the things inside. But you just want it to where the cheese is completely melted at the top, and that's your cue that everything else is done at the bottom. And also your spinach. The spinach on the side that you can see, if you see those are wilted, then you're ready to go.
All right, so this is our final before picture. Before it goes into the fiery furnace. And you're gonna let that go for about 20-25 minutes. So we'll be able to look at this a little bit later. By God's grace. Okay, praise the Lord.